Welcome to Alabama Justice Lawyering Up. My name is Richard Jaffe, the senior partner in the Birmingham, Alabama law firm of Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight. We are going to explore with you the hottest cases, the most controversial topics of Alabama justice, and we're going to bring to you exciting key players that make our Alabama justice work or not work. We look forward to having you. Welcome to another show of Alabama Justice. I'm Richard Jaffe. To my right is Mike Hanle, one of my partners for the law firm of Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight. We have another exciting show and another exciting guest, Bennet Wright. And the name of this show is Sentencing and Justice. Bennet, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you here. Let's just get right into it. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Montana. I grew up on the Crow Indian Reservation in Montana. I played football at the University of Idaho, then finished school at Auburn University, and then went to graduate school at Auburn University as well.
How'd you get to Alabama?
A couple of my old football coaches that had recruited me out of high school, and then a couple of my old college coaches ended up at Auburn University. And I ran into them back in Montana, and they extended an invitation to come to Auburn University, and that's how I ended up in Alabama.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you do currently and your background in regard to that.
Sure. I'm currently the executive director of the Alabama Sentencing Commission. I always like to tell people we are the smallest state government agency in the state of Alabama. We are a separate state agency. We have a staff of 2. We are reformed in 2000, and we began operations in 2001.
What does the Alabama Sentencing Commission do?
We have very broad statutory mandates. We were the brainchild and created by really initial discussions by then U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions and then Alabama Attorney General Bill Pryor. General Pryor, now a judge on the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, wrote the enabling legislation for the Alabama Sentencing Commission. And we have very broad statutory mandates that include making recommendations annually to the governor, to the legislature, the Attorney General, and the Chief Justice about ways to make Alabama's criminal justice system more fair, effective, and efficient.
Bennet, specifically about the Sentencing Commission, what was the reason to create the Sentencing Commission?
Sure. I think there was a realization in Alabama that Alabama needed to move towards a more data-informed system. I think there was a lot of speculation, rumor, innuendo about what was happening, and I think that Senator Sessions and General Pryor really wanted to get a handle on really what the true picture was of criminal justice in the state of Alabama. At the time, there was an emerging national movement for states forming sentencing commissions and for policymakers to lean on sentencing commissions to really inform their work. And that was how the commission really got started.
Okay. We in Alabama have a Habitual Felony Offender Act.
Correct.
Was the commission generated or created to replace that or to work alongside with it?
Sure. The commission was not formed with any particular policy ideal in place. We weren't designed to replace anything, remove anything, create anything. And initially, the first couple of years of the commission was just data collection. We wanted to collect all the data that we could so that we could paint a clear picture for everyone in the state what was happening on a statewide level. I think that's one of the interesting aspects of the commission is that we're really responsible for looking at things on a statewide level. A lot of people tend to look at things locally, and they get caught up in local practices, what local judges do, what local prosecutors do, what local criminal defense lawyers do, and we have to look at what happens on the statewide level. And in order to do that, we have to collect all that information.
What information specifically are you collecting?
Sure. We downloaded all of the information from the court system. So we receive annual information on everyone convicted in state courts every year. So in our office, I receive every year information, including sentencing orders, on all approximately 20,000 people that are convicted of felonies each year. We review pre-sentence investigation reports each year. I receive all of the data and information from the Alabama Department of Corrections, all of the information from the Alabama Department of Pardons and Paroles, and we use that information to paint a picture of the entire felony criminal justice system in the state of Alabama. That was the information that we initially reviewed, not to make a policy decision, but to make sure that we knew what were statewide practices, what were practices amongst all 140 judges in the state, what were the practices in terms of sentences that were handed down, what did the offender pool look like on probation and parole, who was going to community corrections in the state, how did revocation sentences look across the state. So we looked at all that information initially without any eye towards we want to do X, Y, or Z. We wanted to review that information, and then we began to discuss what were the policies that we thought would make Alabama's criminal justice system better.
With so much data being accumulated, how does a staff of two handle all of that?
We were very, very fortunate. We were lucky enough to initially attain the assistance of Applied Research Services out of Atlanta, Georgia, which is, I think, probably the best empirical research minds in the entire country. We were able to get their assistance on some congressional grants, so it came at no taxpayer expense. And we've been fortunate to develop a relationship with them, and we've been able to continue that relationship. They trained our staff. Our other staff member, I would consider her the brightest mind in data in the state of Alabama, and she's really the powerhouse behind our current data efforts.
Before we go to a break, what is the purpose of the Sentencing Commission?
Sure. There are approximately, give or take, about 25 states in America that have sentencing commissions. We all do a little bit of different things. Most states that have sentencing commissions have some sort of sentencing guidelines, and also, if the old adage, if you see one, you've seen one. All states that have guidelines, all guideline structures are different. They're created differently. They operate differently. But so most of us maintain, modify, and create different sentencing practices or guidelines that hopefully provide much more uniform and informed sentences.
Well, I was getting ready to what I'm getting from you is we're really looking for uniformity and fairness.
More of it, yes, sir.
Good deal. All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with Alabama Justice and Bennet Wright. Thank you. I'm Richard Jaffe, senior partner in the law firm of Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight. And with me is Mike Hanle, who has handled many, many, many federal cases, among other cases. Mike, what would you do if you received a call, like you do often, from someone who believes they're a subject or a target of a federal criminal investigation?
Well, the most important thing to do is to immediately reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office to find out who is the principal U.S. Attorney that's handling that case, and you can begin to have a dialogue with that person.
And why is it important to do that?
Well, it allows us to participate in the shaping of the case, how that case will ultimately maybe be charged or not charged at all.
And what are federal sentencing guidelines?
Well, the federal sentencing guidelines are a complex series of calculations that begin with an offense level for each criminal charge, and it includes the calculation of your criminal history, which is your prior criminal conduct.
We at Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight are ready, willing, and able to talk with you or anyone in your family at any time if you find yourself in a position where you need someone experienced in the federal courts. Welcome back with Bennet Wright, Sentencing and Justice. Bennet, let me ask you this. What is probably the biggest challenge for you in your capacity?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge that we face as a state, not just me individually, but Alabama's made very large strides in criminal justice reform over the past decade. The hardest change to any policy is always implementing that policy. And so there's an enormous amount of educational and training efforts that have to go on to really make these policy efforts successful. So on an annual basis, we provide training to the judiciary, to all the prosecutors in the state, to the criminal defense bar, to probation and parole officers, community correction personnel, and law enforcement as well. So it really is an ongoing training effort that's almost continual every year.
You mentioned in the first segment about a community corrections facility. What is that?
Sure. In Alabama, approximately 2/3 of the counties in the state have community corrections programs. And those are similar to probation and parole services, but yet community corrections are local-based functions. That is, if someone in the state is on probation and parole, that's under the auspices of the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. So that is a state function. Community corrections are formed by individual counties, and so that you can have more local control and to tap into local resources. So that's the one part of the criminal justice system that actually allows for more local autonomy, that provides for community-based supervision.
But in a community corrections facility, there are no restrictions in terms of actually bars like in a prison, correct?
Well, that's also one thing that varies across the state. Okay. There are some counties in the state where community correction facilities are in fact lockup residential facilities. For instance, in Houston County, the community corrections facility is the old Houston County Jail.
Okay.
So there are some individuals throughout the state that serve community correction sentences and they are incarcerated. That is the exception rather than the rule, however.
In the first segment, we talked about all the data that you collected during the first couple of years of the Sentencing Commission. You created guidelines based on that data. Can you explain how that process worked?
Sure. I think no one could disagree that across Alabama, there was not a lot of uniformity in criminal sentencing. And a lot of the times, offenders that were what we call similarly situated, that is, they committed similar criminal conduct, they were being convicted of the same felony offense, and they had similar criminal history, they received very different sentences. And the word disparity is always a hot topic in criminal justice, and there's warranted disparity and there's unwarranted disparity. One of our goals was to eliminate as much unwarranted disparity as we could. We wanted to provide for more uniform sentencing. That's not to say that everyone should receive the exact same sentence based on their conduct and criminal history, but we really wanted to, for lack of a better term, move the hash marks in. We really wanted to really make sure that sentences weren't completely disparate across the state so that race, gender, location of courts really didn't have a bearing on the sentence that was imposed. The sentence that should be imposed should be based on someone's criminal conduct and other pertinent sentencing factors. One of the questions you asked when we reviewed the early on information, we identified what information was statistically significant historically in Alabama in regards to sentencing. So for example, one of the things that of course was significant was someone's felony criminal history. So the worksheets include information such as the number of prior felony convictions someone has had. Have they failed on community supervision in the past? What is the severity of the offense that they're currently being convicted for? So we compile that information and then make recommendations for their sentence.
Let me ask you about something that my partner, Mike Hanle, knows a lot about, and I know you do too, and that is sentencing guidelines. What are they, and how long have we had them?
Sure. Alabama has had sentencing guidelines since 2006. So Alabama's had them for just a little bit over a decade now. For approximately 7 years, from 2006 to 2007, Alabama had what we call voluntary sentencing guidelines. That is, the courts in Alabama were required to consider those guidelines, but the courts were not required to follow those guidelines. And one of the initial things that we saw throughout the state was that really was not reducing disparity. There were some jurisdictions in the state that adopted the guidelines almost from day one, so they followed those guidelines. There are other jurisdictions in the state that rarely, if ever, follow the guidelines. So in essence, we created some wider disparity in the state just based on jurisdictions that wanted to consider the guidelines or not. In 2012, the Alabama legislature took a very bold step, and they said for nonviolent felony offenses in the state of Alabama, we're going to make the courts follow those recommendations except in extraordinary circumstances. So Alabama kind of took a lead nationally and departed from what the rest of the nation was doing in that they made trial courts in Alabama start to follow Sentencing Commission recommendations. We had another change to the guidelines last year that incorporated large-scale changes from when the Alabama legislature passed what we call prison reform legislation. So Alabama, in essence, has had 3 different versions of sentencing guidelines over the last 10 years. Those sentencing guidelines have 2 components. One component is a recommendation of whether or not someone should go to prison. We call that the in or the out decision. And then on the backside, we have a sentence length decision that determines both for people that are sentenced to probation or community corrections or people that are sentenced to prison, what the length of their sentence should be. So those are the 2 components. Who goes to prison and who doesn't, and what should that sentence length look like for that individual.
So the guidelines really don't apply to violent crimes.
They do, however, those are still voluntary. So the trial courts in Alabama still have the ability to sentence violent crimes under the guidelines, but they are not required to.
I see.
We talked about community corrections a little while ago. Where does community corrections fit into the scheme of whether it's an in sentence or an out sentence?
Sure. And as we discussed earlier, there's so much local variation across the state with really community correction programs. There are some community correction programs we discussed that are merely identical to a jail facility. There are other community correction programs that don't have any jail capacity to them. Therefore, when we incorporated community corrections into the guidelines, they're both an in and an out recommendation. Someone can always be sentenced, if otherwise eligible, to a local community corrections program. We wanted to do that to, once again, maintain some local autonomy and to incorporate all of the different versions of community correction programs throughout the state.
As the guidelines have been implemented and you've started